It all started with a cat, a complaint, and a complete and total overreaction. Mine, mostly. Most sane people, when faced with a passive-aggressive note from a neighbor, would maybe try to keep their cat inside. They might apologize. They might even bake a peace-offering pie. I, however, am not most sane people. When my neighbor declared war on my cat, I responded not with a pie, but with federal paperwork, a team of bewildered contractors, and the kind of malicious compliance that legends are made of. This is the story of how a dispute over petunias led me to accidentally become the director of a registered 501(c)(3) charitable organization. Out of my own house. My life, before the great feline schism of last summer, was a monument to comfortable mediocrity. I'm Leo, a software developer whose primary professional skill is convincing a computer to do things so I don't have to. This noble pursuit allows me to work from home, a term which here means in pajama pants with a cat draped over my keyboard. My house was a beige box in a neighborhood of other beige boxes called Whispering Pines, a name that was wildly inaccurate, as the only things whispering were the neighbors, and the only pines were the little green tree-shaped air fresheners hanging from their rear-view mirrors. It was a kingdom of quiet desperation and fiercely competitive lawn care. My roommate, and the furry overlord of this domestic tranquility, was General Custard. I'd found him as a scrawny, rain-soaked kitten, and he had since blossomed into a majestic ginger and white beast of profound fluff and unearned confidence. He wasn't a pet. He was a landlord who let me live there in exchange for food and the occasional chin scratch. His rent was paid in purrs and the solemn, ritualistic presentation of dead leaves on my welcome mat. The general's primary duty, as he saw it, was the daily security patrol of his domain. This domain, in his mind, extended beyond my modest patch of grass to include the properties of at least 4 other houses. He wasn't roaming, he was conducting reconnaissance. He was a furry, 4-legged neighborhood watch, ensuring that all squirrels were behaving, all sunbeams were adequately tested for warmth, and all unattended garden gnomes were given a proper, disdainful sniff. Life was simple. Coffee, code, and cat. It was a fragile, perfect ecosystem. And then Carol moved in. She lived 2 doors down, in the house with the surgically precise lawn and the petunias that looked like they were grown in a lab by NASA. We called her the Watcher. She had a permanent visor, a gait that could only be described as militant power walking, and a stare that could curdle milk from 50 paces. She was the human embodiment of a freshly printed HOA violation notice. From the moment her moving truck left, her eyes were fixed on the furry orange agent of chaos sauntering through her yard. I didn't know her name then. I just knew her as the shadow that fell over my peaceful existence. The first shot in the war was not a bang, but the crinkle of plastic. It was a Tuesday. I went to grab a package from my porch and found it. A single sheet of paper, laminated, taped to my front door with an aggressive amount of clear packing tape. The font was Times New Roman, 12-point. The language was pure, distilled passive aggression. Concerning, unsupervised domestic animal. Date, July 12th. To the resident of 114 Whispering Pines Lane, it has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association Beautification Committee that a feline entity, orange and white in coloration, has been repeatedly observed trespassing on private properties in direct violation of City Ordinance 7B, subsection 4, Leash Laws and Animal Containment. Said entity was most recently sighted near the prize-winning Petunia Bed at 118 Whispering Pines Lane, engaging in what can only be described as unauthorized lounging. We trust you will rectify this situation with immediate effect to ensure our community remains safe, orderly, and aesthetically pleasing for all residents. Future violations will be documented and may result in official fines. Sincerely, Carol Peterson, Chairwoman, HOA Beautification Committee. I stared at the note. Feline entity? Unauthorized lounging? It was the most ridiculously formal accusation I'd ever seen. I immediately peeled it off my door, went inside, and called my best friend. Dave, you are not going to believe this, I said, launching into a dramatic reading of the entire laminated document. Dave's laughter crackled through the phone. Dude, you got served by the Petunia police. She called him a feline entity. He sounds like a UFO. And what is unauthorized lounging? Is there an authorized version? Do I need to fill out a permit for him to nap in the sun? This is amazing, Dave sputtered. You have to frame that. But seriously, what are you gonna do? This lady sounds like she means business. What am I supposed to do? He's a cat. His life's purpose is to find the most inconvenient places to nap. That includes, apparently, in the middle of a prized petunia bed. Dude, just put a tiny orange safety vest on him, Dave suggested, his voice thick with amusement. And maybe a little hard hat. You know, for safety. That's acknowledging his guilt, I protested, scooping up the general, who was now purring against my leg. The general is a free citizen of this lawn. He has inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of lizards. He has the right to get snatched by animal control, Dave countered. Just keep him inside for a few days, until she finds a new crusade, like someone whose recycling bin is an inch too close to the curb. He was right, of course. It was the sensible thing to do, so I tried. For one whole day, I kept General Custard inside. It was a day of torment for us both. He sat at the glass patio door, his tail twitching, emitting a series of low, mournful meows that sounded like he was narrating a tragic opera. He'd look at the door, then at me, his eyes filled with the deepest betrayal a creature has ever conveyed without using words. By evening, I couldn't take the guilt. I cracked. I opened the door. He was out for no more than 3 minutes when the front door of 118 opened. There she was. Carol, in the flesh, clipboard in hand. She marched across her perfect lawn and stopped at the invisible property line between our houses, a general surveying a battlefield. I see the subject of my letter is still at large, she said, her voice as crisp and sterile as her beige windbreaker. He's just enjoying the evening air, I said, trying to sound breezy. You know, vitamin D, it's good for his fortitude. I gave a weak chuckle. She did not. Her eyes narrowed. It's not good for my property values, or my petunias. This is a respectable community, Mr. Henderson, not a barnyard. He's one cat, Carol. He's not exactly hosting raves in your rhododendrons. One cat is all it takes to upset the delicate ecosystem of a well-maintained garden, she sniffed. I'm giving you a final neighborly warning. Keep your animal on your property. The next time I won't be leaving a note. I'll be making a formal report to animal control and the city authorities. She spun on her heel and marched back to her beige fortress, leaving me standing on my lawn with my cat. The general, oblivious, rolled onto his back in a patch of clover. He was happy. I was not. The line had been drawn, not in the sand, but in the perfectly edged turf between our 2 yards. And she had just crossed it. The thing about a threat from a woman who laminates her complaint letters is that you take it seriously. I spent the next week trying to engineer a compromise between a cat's fundamental need for freedom and Carol's fundamental need for absolute control. I bought a harness and leash. General Custard responded by going completely boneless the moment I clipped it on, forcing me to drag him across the lawn like a furry, indignant sack of potatoes. I tried building a small enclosed pen in the backyard. He scaled the 6-foot mesh wall in under 10 seconds and sat on top, looking down at my failure with palpable disdain. My futile efforts only seemed to embolden Carol. She had escalated from passive-aggressive notes to active surveillance. Every time I looked out my window, she was there, weeding, power-walking, pretending to check her mail, her eyes always flicking towards my house. It was like living next door to a beige-clad T-1000 whose sole mission was to terminate feline liberty. The inevitable happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was engrossed in debugging a particularly nasty piece of code when I heard the knock. It wasn't the gentle tap of a delivery person. It was a firm, official rap. I opened the door to find 2 police officers standing on my porch. One was older, with a mustache that had seen better decades and an expression of profound, soul-deep weariness. The other was young, barely out of the academy, with a clipboard clutched in his hands like it was the only thing keeping him from floating away. "Leo Henderson?" the older one, Miller, asked, his voice gravelly. "That's me," I said, my heart doing a little tap dance against my ribs. "Is there a problem, officers?" Officer Miller sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of every ridiculous suburban dispute he'd ever had to settle. "Sir, we received a report about a cat. A cat walking around." He paused, as if hoping I'd see the absurdity of the situation and he could just go back to his car. The younger one, Davis, piped up. "A repeat offender feline, according to the complainant." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Carol Peterson, I presume?" "The complainant wishes to remain anonymous," Davis said, failing to hide a slight smile. "Right, anonymous," I deadpanned. "Well, the feline entity you're looking for is currently asleep on that chair." I pointed through the screen door at General Custard, who was curled into a perfect orange and white circle, the picture of innocence. "Sir, is this your cat?" Miller asked, his tone pleading with me to just make this easy. "That's General Custard, yes," I replied. "He's a decorated veteran of the War on Boredom, holds the rank of Supreme Fluff Commander." Officer Davis dutifully scribbled in his notepad. "General Custard. Right. Does the general have a history of aggression?" The complainant mentioned her petunias felt threatened. "Only towards unattended Amazon packages and the structural integrity of toilet paper rolls," I said. "As for the petunias, I can't speak to their emotional state, but I assure you, the general is a pacifist." Miller held up a hand. "Look, son, here's the deal. The city has a leash law. It applies to cats, too. Technically, your cat shouldn't be roaming free. That's the long and short of it." He handed me a brochure with a picture of a smiling golden retriever on it. The title read, "Being a Responsible Pet Owner." "So, you're giving me a verbal warning?" I asked. "I'm giving you the advice to try and keep your neighbor happy so I don't have to drive all the way out here again because a cat looked at a flower funny," he said. He tipped his hat, and they walked back to their car, leaving me on the porch holding a pamphlet intended for dog owners. The absurdity was reaching critical levels. But Carol was just getting started. The official HOA offensive began the following week. It started with a crisp, white envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a fine for $50 for violation of Bylaw 12.3, animal nuisance. Attached was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of General Custard sleeping under a rose bush in a neighboring yard. He was circled in thick red marker, like a target. A week later, another envelope, $100. This time the photo showed him stalking a grasshopper near Carol's driveway. It was evidence. He was clearly menacing the local insect population. I was losing my mind. Every day was a new battle in a war I didn't even want to fight. I was on the phone with Dave, pacing my living room like a caged animal, a feeling I was beginning to understand all too well. "She's documenting him, Dave. She has a file. I'm expecting to see his face on the post office wall next to Most Wanted," I ranted. "Dude, you need to fight back," Dave said. Go full scorched earth. What am I supposed to do? Train an army of squirrels to bury acorns in her lawn? I've thought about it, believe me, but I need something legal. Something she can't touch. You need to find a loophole, he mused. Some kind of protection. It's a shame he's not an endangered species. You could declare your backyard a protected wildlife habitat. He's an orange tabby, Dave. The most endangered he gets is when the food bowl is empty. Well, what if he's not just a pet? Dave said, the telltale sound of a brainstorming session entering his voice. You need to change his status. Like, make him a working animal. A therapy cat. For who? Me? My sanity is already a lost cause. No, for the community. But that won't work. Okay, what if you declare your house an embassy? The sovereign nation of Leonistan. The general has diplomatic immunity. Hilarious, I said, sinking onto the couch. General Custard hopped onto my chest and started purring, a tiny, vibrating engine of contentment. I looked down at him, this little creature who was the source of so much joy for me, and so much fury for my neighbor. He wasn't just my pet. He was a force of nature. He belonged to the world, or at least to the 4-house radius he patrolled. And then Dave's stupid joke sparked something, a tiny, insane, beautiful flicker of an idea. What if he's not a pet? Dave, hang on, I said, sitting up straight. What, did you figure out the squirrel army thing? No, better. You said he's not a pet. What if you're right? What if he's not my pet, subject to petty HOA rules and leash laws? Okay, I'm following. Where is this going? What if he's a resident, an occupant, of a shelter, a sanctuary? The word hung in the air between us. Sanctuary. It sounded so official, so noble, so untouchable. There was a long pause on Dave's end. Leo, are you seriously suggesting? Why not? I was on my feet again, the idea blossoming in my mind like a glorious, spite-fueled mushroom cloud. What can she do if my house isn't just a house? What if it's a charitable organization? A non-profit dedicated to the welfare of free-roaming felines? He's not my pet cat roaming the neighborhood. He's a beneficiary of our outreach program. Dave was howling with laughter. You're insane. You're actually going to weaponize the IRS to win a fight with your neighbor about your cat. It's the perfect crime, I exclaimed, grabbing my laptop. I started typing furiously. How to start an animal non-profit. Zoning laws for home-based animal shelters. Tax-exempt status for feline sanctuaries. Was this a rational response to a minor neighborhood dispute? Absolutely not. It was the nuclear option. It was using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. But the image that flashed in my mind, the image of Carol's perfectly smug face crumbling in confusion as she stared at an official, IRS-approved non-profit charter sign on my front lawn, that was a goal worth fighting for. That was a victory worth any amount of paperwork. I spent the entire weekend buried in legal forms and mission statements. I paid the filing fees online with a credit card. I drafted our founding document. I christened it the General Custard Foundation for Feline Freedom and Fortitude. Its mission? To provide a safe and enriching environment for felines who, like the noble creature who inspired our cause, reject the constraints of conventional domesticity and embrace a life of exploration and independence. I clicked Submit on the final form. There was no going back. The first shots of the war had been fired by Carol, but I was about to roll a tank onto her petunia bed. Filing a bunch of online forms while fueled by caffeine and righteous indignation is one thing. Actually turning my 3-bedroom beige box into a legitimate, functioning nonprofit was another beast entirely. The confirmation email from the state arrived first, officially recognizing the General Custard Foundation as a corporate entity. The federal 501 C3 status would take longer, but I was on my way. My petty revenge scheme was now a registered business. The first problem I realized was that a sanctuary for one is just a dude with a cat. The second problem was that my house looked suspiciously like a house. I needed to change that. If I was going to claim this was a sanctuary, it needed to look and act the part. It needed infrastructure. It needed enrichment. It needed, I decided after an hour of scrolling through Pinterest boards for cat enclosures, a catio. And so I found myself on the phone with the only contractor whose number I had, a gruff, no-nonsense old-timer named Sal, who had once fixed my gutter. Sal showed up the next day in a dusty Ford F-150, took one look at my house, and grunted. He was a man of few words and many faded tattoos. I invited him in and handed him a cup of coffee and a napkin. On the napkin was my grand design. He stared at it for a long, silent moment, his brow furrowed. "So, let me get this straight," he said, his voice raspy like sandpaper. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at one of my crude drawings. "You want what did you call it?" "A catio," I repeated proudly. "It's like a patio but for cats, an enclosed outdoor space. It needs to connect that window in the living room with the one in the office." Sal grunted. He took a sip of coffee. "And you want shelves on the outside of your house for cats to sit on?" "They're observation perches," I corrected him, "for security and enrichment. It gives them a tactical vantage point over their territory." Sal stared at me as if I'd just started speaking in tongues. He pointed to another part of the napkin. "And this interior feline superhighway?" "Ah, yes. I'm glad you asked about that. I want you to cut holes, about 10 inches in diameter, high up in the walls between the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway. Then you install a shelf that runs through them. It's for optimal traffic flow. We're expecting residents." Sal put the napkin down on the table. He slowly took off his dusty baseball cap, ran a hand through his thinning gray hair, and put the cap back on. He looked at me. He looked at General Custard, who was watching the proceedings from the top of the refrigerator. He looked back at me. "Kid," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of 1,000 bizarre home renovation requests. "I've been doing this for 40 years. I've built houses on the side of a cliff. I turned a millionaire's basement into a full-scale pirate ship-themed bowling alley. I once installed a retractable shark tank in a guy's floor. This," he said, tapping the napkin, "is the weirdest damn thing I've ever heard." "So you'll do it?" I asked, my voice full of hope. "It's gonna be expensive," he warned. "Cutting into load-bearing walls, custom screening, all this perch stuff. The price is gonna be double my usual rate, for the sheer headache." "I'll pay it," I said without hesitation. It was a bluff. My savings account was about to scream in agony, but it was a necessary investment in the war effort. Sal just shook his head and started taking measurements. "Whatever you say, kid, it's your circus." While Sal was drawing up the plans, I dove headfirst into the bureaucratic maze. My days became a blur of hold music and a condescendingly cheerful automated voice telling me that my call was important. I had to learn a whole new language, the language of permits, zoning variances, and public health codes. My first call was to the city planning office. "Good morning, city planning. How can I help you?" "Hi, yes. I'm looking to make some modifications to my residential property for the purposes of operating a small, home-based, non-profit animal sanctuary." A long silence. "A what?" "An animal sanctuary for cats." Another pause. "Sir, is this a commercial enterprise?" No, it's a 501c3, a charity." "Please hold." The hold music was a tinny, instrumental version of Don't Stop Believin'. It felt appropriate. Next was the health department, who were very concerned about waste disposal protocols. I had to submit a 3-page plan detailing my strategy for scooping litter boxes and disposing of the waste in sealed, regulation-compliant containers. I spent an entire afternoon writing a formal document about cat poop. The most surreal conversation was with the IRS. After weeks of waiting, I got a call from an agent assigned to review my non-profit application. Her name was Brenda, and she sounded as tired as Officer Miller had looked. "Mr. Henderson," she began, her voice a monotone drone, "I'm reviewing your application for tax-exempt status for the General Custard Foundation for Feline Freedom and Fortitude." She said the name with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. "That's us," I said, trying to sound professional and not at all like a man whose entire enterprise was built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated spite. "Your mission statement says you aim to, and I quote, provide a safe and enriching environment for felines who reject conventional domesticity." "Exactly," I confirmed. "They're free spirits, wanderers, philosophers with paws." There was a long, tired pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. I could almost hear her eyes rolling. Finally, she spoke. Just make sure you keep your receipts, Mr. Henderson. All of them. And your donation records. The IRS is very particular about donation records." The call ended. I had passed the test. The federal government was now begrudgingly on my side. But my grand sanctuary was still missing a key component. More cats. I couldn't be a legitimate shelter with only one resident, especially when that resident was the inspiration for the whole thing. It felt like a conflict of interest. So, I took the next step. I drove down to the local county animal shelter, a low brick building that smelled of bleach and quiet sadness. Behind the counter was a woman with kind eyes, a messy ponytail, and a stethoscope around her neck. Her name tag read, Dr. Anya Sharma. I explained my situation. I tried to frame it as a noble calling, a passion project, leaving out the part about the laminated note and the Petunia War. I showed her my official state registration document and the architectural plans Sal had drawn up. She listened patiently, her head tilted, a skeptical but intrigued look on her face. "So you've started a non-profit cat sanctuary in your suburban home because you feel passionately about independent felines?" "That's the gist of it, yes," I said. "Mr. Henderson, we get a lot of enthusiastic people in here," she said gently. "People with big hearts and small apartments who want to save every animal they see. It usually doesn't end well." "I'm serious about this," I insisted. "I'm investing real money. I'm following all the health codes. I want to do this right. I'm just looking to start small. I was hoping I could maybe foster or provide a permanent home for a couple of cats that are having a hard time getting adopted. The difficult ones." Anya studied me for a long moment. I think she saw past the slightly insane premise and recognized the genuine desperation, and maybe the genuine love for my cat in my eyes. A slow smile spread across her face. "The difficult ones, huh?" she said. "Well, I think I have just the candidates for you." She led me back into the kennels. In one cage was a massive, scarred tomcat with one cloudy eye and a permanently unimpressed expression. His name tag read, Pirate Pete. According to Anya, he'd been returned 3 times for being grumpy and not enjoying cuddles. In another cage, a fluffy, beautiful Persian cat was huddled in the very back corner, trembling. Her name was Duchess Fluffington, and she was terrified of everything. Loud noises, sudden movements, human hands. "They're our longest-term residents," Anya said softly. "Pete's a big softy once he trusts you, but he looks intimidating. And the Duchess just needs a quiet, patient home, where she can come out of her shell on her own time." "They're perfect," I said. a wave of genuine purpose washing over me. This was about more than just beating Carol now. An hour later, I was driving home with two very confused cats in carriers in my back seat. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Sal's truck already there. The sound of a power saw whined from my backyard. On the lawn, a small mountain of lumber was growing. Across the street, peeking through her pristine blinds, I saw the silhouette of Carol. She was watching. The project was no longer just an idea. It was real. And as I carried Pirate Pete and Duchess Fluffington into their new, soon-to-be upgraded home, I knew things were about to get a whole lot more interesting. The next 2 weeks were a blur of controlled chaos. My quiet beige house transformed into an active construction zone. The whining buzz of Sal's circular saw became my morning alarm clock, and the rhythmic thud of hammers was the soundtrack to my workday. Dust motes danced in every sunbeam, and the scent of freshly cut pine hung heavy in the air. Sal and his two-man crew were surprisingly efficient, treating my bizarre requests with a kind of professional resignation. The Feline superhighway was the first to be completed. I'll never forget the moment Sal's apprentice, a young kid named Kevin, who seemed to communicate exclusively through shrugs and nods, drilled a perfect 10-inch circle high on my living room wall. It felt like a violation and a victory all at once. General Custard watched the entire process from a safe distance, his head cocked, as if to say, "It's about time you installed a proper command corridor." The catio was the main event. It was a magnificent structure, a screened-in enclosure that wrapped around the back of my house, complete with ramps, multiple levels, and a special sun-drenched platform I'd specifically requested for peak napping efficiency. Sal had even, after much grumbling, installed the exterior observation perches under the eaves. The commotion did not go unnoticed. The neighborhood, a place where the most exciting event was usually the arrival of the recycling truck, was buzzing. People would slow their cars as they drove by, staring at the strange wooden appendages growing on my house. My immediate neighbors were a mix of amused and baffled. "Hey, Leo," called my neighbor Tom from across his fence one afternoon. He was a good-natured guy who spent his weekends obsessing over his barbecue smoker. "Building a deck?" "Sort of," I yelled back over the sound of a nail gun. "It's an elevated feline promenade, much more sophisticated." Tom just blinked, nodded slowly, and went back to trimming his hedges, clearly deciding it was a question not worth pursuing any further. Carol, however, was pursuing it with the intensity of a homicide detective. Her blinds were in a perpetual state of being peeked through. I'd catch glimpses of her, a shadowy figure cataloging every delivery of lumber, every new structure. Her power walks now included a slow, deliberate pass by my property, her eyes scanning for any possible violation. I could feel her rage building from 2 doors down. It was a palpable thing, like the hum of a high-voltage power line. Pirate Pete and the Duchess, meanwhile, were settling in. Pete, the grumpy one-eyed wonder, immediately claimed the highest perch on the newly built catio as his personal throne, from which he would survey his new kingdom with a stern, proprietary gaze. The Duchess remained hidden under my bed for 3 days, but the lure of the feline superhighway proved too great. I caught her one evening, a fluffy ghost, tentatively peeking her head out of the hole in the kitchen wall, her whiskers twitching. She was exploring. It was working. The day the project was finally finished, Sal wiped his hands on his jeans, gave the catio a final, critical look, and actually cracked a smile. "You know, kid," he said, shaking his head, "it's the craziest damn thing I've ever built, but it ain't half bad. The cats look happy." He handed me the final invoice. It was astronomical. I paid it without flinching, even though my bank account was now weeping silently in a corner. The final piece of the puzzle, the cherry on top of my glorious spiked sundae, arrived the next day. It was a sign, professionally made, that I had ordered online. It was a tasteful forest green with elegant white lettering. I spent a full hour with a level and a post hole digger, ensuring it was perfectly centered on my front lawn, positioned for maximum visibility from Carol's living room window. When I was done, I stepped back to admire my handiwork. It read, "The General Custard Foundation for Feline Freedom, a registered 501(c)(3) non-profit organization. Visitors by appointment only." It was beautiful. It was official. It was a declaration of war, printed in a lovely, non-threatening serif font. I didn't have to wait long. Not 10 minutes after I'd finished, her front door flew open. Carol stormed across the lawn, a beige tornado of fury. She wasn't power walking now, she was marching. The clipboard was back. She stopped directly in front of the sign, her face a thunderous mask. "What?" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "Is the meaning of this?" I adopted my most pleasant, helpful tone. "Oh, hello, Carol. It's the sign for my foundation. Do you like the font? I felt the serif was a nice touch. Very distinguished." "You can't run a business out of your home," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the sign. "It's against HOA bylaws. Article 7, Section C, no commercial enterprises in a residential zone." "Oh, but you see, that's the beauty of it," I said, barely able to contain my glee. "It's not a business. It's a non-profit organization, a charity. Totally different tax implications, you see. We're providing a vital community service for at-risk felines." Her face went from red to a pale, blotchy white. The gears were turning in her head, smoke practically pouring from her ears as she tried to process this new information. This is a trick! This is illegal!" "On the contrary," I said, leaning casually against my mailbox. "It's all perfectly legal. I'd recommend you check with your lawyer before making any formal complaints. I've already spoken to mine, and apparently, discriminating against a registered charitable organization is seriously frowned upon. Something about the Fair Housing Act and protected class status. It gets awfully complicated. I had no lawyer. I had spent 15 minutes on a legal advice subreddit, but she didn't need to know that. The effect was immediate. The mention of lawyers and the Fair Housing Act hit her like a stun gun. She sputtered, speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She looked at the sign. She looked at the catio. She looked at me, her eyes burning with a hateful fire. Finally, without another word, she spun around and stormed back into her house, slamming the door so hard I thought I saw the windows rattle. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. That night, Dave came over with a celebratory pizza. While we were eating, he was scrolling through his phone. "You know what this needs?" he said. "This needs to be public." Before I could protest, he had snapped a dozen pictures. Pirate Pete on his perch, looking regal, the Duchess cautiously exploring the superhighway, General Custard supervising the entire operation. He started a Facebook page, the General Custard Foundation. He wrote a short, heartwarming, and almost entirely fictional origin story about a man who dedicated his life to helping misunderstood cats. He left out the parts about spite, pettiness, and petunias. I thought nothing of it. But then, something strange happened. The page got a few dozen likes, then 100. A local animal rescue group shared it. A popular pet-centric blog wrote a short, quirky article titled, "Local Man Turns His House into a Cat Paradise to Spite His Neighbor." The title was a little too on the nose, but it worked. The next morning, I opened my front door to find 2 large bags of premium cat food and a box of toys on my porch. There was a note attached. "For the General and his troops, keep up the good work." My petty revenge project had an audience, and they were sending donations. This was getting way bigger than I had ever intended. For about a week, there was an eerie peace. A cold war. I'd see Carol getting her mail, and she'd pointedly stare at the ground. She stopped her patrol routes past my house. The silence was deafening, and frankly, a little suspicious. I knew a woman who laminated complaint letters wasn't going to be defeated by a well-worded sign and a bluff about the Fair Housing Act. She was regrouping. She was looking for a new angle of attack. And then she found it. The official-looking letter that arrived wasn't from the HOA. It was from the County Department of Public Health. It informed me that an anonymous complaint had been filed regarding the keeping of multiple animals in a residential property, citing concerns over sanitation, odor, and potential public health risks. An inspector would be arriving in 2 days' time to conduct a full assessment of the premises. If the facility did not meet county health codes, I would be ordered to cease operations immediately and surrender the animals. This was it. Her trump card. The health inspector gambit. She couldn't get me on zoning or HOA bylaws, so she was going for the kill shot, trying to prove my sanctuary was a dirty, unsafe sham. And she was smart. My house was clean, sure, but was it pass a government inspection with flying colors clean? With 3 cats, one of whom was a long-haired shedding machine, I had my doubts. I immediately called my 2 co-conspirators. "Code Red," I said when Dave answered. "Carol just called in the big guns." An hour later, Dave and Anya were in my living room, the 3 of us huddled around the ominous letter like it was a bomb. Anya, bless her practical veterinarian heart, was all business. "Okay, this is serious, but it's not insurmountable," she said, her tone calm and reassuring. "I've been through dozens of these inspections at the shelter. They're looking for specific things. Clean food and water bowls, properly stored food, adequate ventilation, and most importantly, immaculate litter boxes. The litter boxes are everything." "My litter boxes are fine," I said, suddenly very self-conscious about my scooping schedule. "Fine isn't going to cut it," Anya said firmly. "They need to be pristine. We're going to scrub this entire house from top to bottom. Leo, you're on floors and surfaces. Dave, you're on laundry, all cat beds, blankets, everything. I'll handle the critical stuff. Food stations, litter protocol, and prepping the cats." "Prepping the cats?" Dave asked. "Are you going to give them a tiny briefing?" "Okay, guys, look respectable. No hacking up furballs until the guy in the polo shirt leaves." "Something like that," Anya said with a grin. "We need to make sure they're all groomed and look healthy and happy. A happy, well-cared-for animal is the best evidence we have." What followed was a frantic, 24-hour cleaning montage worthy of a Hollywood movie. We were a whirlwind of bleach, paper towels, and nervous energy. I scrubbed floors until my back ached. Dave wrestled with cat hair-covered blankets, his sneezes echoing through the house. Anya completely overhauled the litter box situation, replacing my simple plastic trays with what looked like the command center for a feline space mission. She created a feeding station with labeled bowls and a laminated feeding schedule taped to the wall. It looked incredibly professional. We worked late into the night, fueled by pizza and the shared, burning desire to see Carol's plan go up in flames. By the time the inspector was due to arrive, the house had never been cleaner. It smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaner and cat-safe enzymatic spray. The cats, having been thoroughly brushed and pampered, seemed to sense the tension and were on their best behavior. Even Pirate Pete looked less like a grumpy brawler and more like a distinguished gentleman of leisure. At exactly 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my shirt, and opened the door. Standing there was a cheerful-looking man in a county-logoed polo shirt, holding a clipboard. He had a kind smile and crinkly eyes. This was not the stern, hard-nosed bureaucrat I had been expecting. "Leo Henderson?" he asked. "I'm George from the health department, here for the inspection." "Come on in, George," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a twitch in the blinds of Carol's house across the street. She was watching. The audience was seated for the final act. George stepped inside and took a look around. "Wow," he said, his eyes wide. "What is all this?" He pointed up at the Feline superhighway. "That's our interior enrichment trail," Anya explained, stepping forward and shaking his hand. "Dr. Anya Sharma. I'm a consulting veterinarian for the foundation." She sounded so official I almost believed her myself. George's eyes lit up. "A vet? Fantastic. And enrichment trails? I love it." He made a note on his clipboard. "Okay, let's see the facility." We gave him the grand tour. We showed him the meticulously clean food station, the space-age litter boxes, the sealed food containers. He checked the ventilation and the screening on the catio. With every stop, his smile grew wider. He was genuinely impressed. But the real turning point came when he actually met the residents. General Custard, ever the charming host, rubbed against his leg, purring loudly. The Duchess, in a moment of unprecedented bravery, crept out from her hiding spot and watched him with curious, wide eyes. Then George knelt down by Pirate Pete, who was lounging on his favorite perch. "And who's this handsome fella?" he asked softly. "That's Pirate Pete," I said. "He's a bit of a grump, so don't be offended if he—" But Pete, for the first time since he'd arrived, did something extraordinary. He leaned forward and gently butted his head against George's outstretched hand, demanding to be petted. George melted. He spent the next 5 minutes scratching Pete behind the ears, cooing at him. "This is the best private shelter I've ever seen," George declared, finally standing up and beaming at us. "You guys are amazing. The Feline superhighway is genius. Most places just warehouse them, but you're actually thinking about their psychological well-being. The records are perfect. The place is spotless. You pass. With flying colors." He scribbled his final notes, tore a sheet off his clipboard, and handed it to me. It was the official inspection report. At the bottom, in the overall assessment box, he had checked, "Excellent." Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. We had done it. We had won. As George walked to the door, he turned back to us. "You know, my sister's been looking to adopt a cat. Do you have a card or a brochure or something?" We did. Dave had printed 100 of them last week as a joke. I handed one to him. "Thanks again, George." "No, thank you," he said, "for what you're doing here." He walked out the front door and down the path. As he reached the sidewalk, he caught my eye and gave me a big thumbs up. I smiled, my face aching from the tension. I turned my gaze across the street, directly at Carol's window. I knew she was there. I knew she was watching. I raised my hand in a polite, slow, deliberate wave. It was a simple gesture. Friendly, neighborly, and it was, without a doubt, the most devastatingly satisfying moment of my entire life. Checkmate. A few months later, the dust had settled, both literally and figuratively. The summer heat had given way to the cool crispness of autumn, and Whispering Pines had a new, slightly bizarre status quo. My house was no longer just 114 Whispering Pines Lane. It was the official headquarters and sole branch of the General Custard Foundation for Feline Freedom and Fortitude. Life was no longer quiet. It was a chaotic, fur-covered, and strangely wonderful symphony. We had 5 resident cats now. After George the health inspector's glowing report, and his sister adopting a cat from the county shelter on our recommendation, our reputation had grown. Anya had formalized her role, coming by twice a week to help with health checks and adoption screenings. Our friendship had slowly, quietly, blossomed into something more. Something that involved late-night conversations over paperwork and shared smiles as we watched the Duchess finally learn to play with a feather wand. Dave, My erstwhile propaganda minister had turned our little Facebook page into a minor local phenomenon. He'd post daily updates. Pirate Pete's log, stardate 78,845.5. The perimeter is secure. The human has provided adequate rations. All is well. People loved it. The donations of food and toys hadn't stopped. And we'd even received a few small cash donations, which I'd meticulously recorded in a spreadsheet for Brenda at the IRS. My work-from-home life now involved stepping over sleeping cats, untangling keyboard cords from curious paws, and taking conference calls with Pirate Pete's one good eye, staring at me judgmentally from a monitor shelf. It was hectic. It was messy. It was the most fulfilling thing I had ever done. One crisp Saturday morning, I was sitting on my front porch, sipping a cup of coffee. General Custard was lounging on the railing of the catio, the undisputed king of all he surveyed. Pirate Pete was sunning himself on a welcome mat shaped like a fish. Across the street, something was different. In front of Carol's house, nestled in her perfect petunia-free lawn, was a sign. Not a laminated one. This one was larger, planted on 2 wooden stakes. In big bold letters it read, "For sale." I took a long, slow sip of my coffee. I had heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was moving to a gated community, one with stricter bylaws, and presumably no cats. I looked at my strange, wonderful, chaotic home. Did I ever mean to become a non-profit founder and the director of a feline sanctuary? Of course not. All I ever wanted was for my cat to be able to sunbathe in a patch of grass without causing an international incident. But as they say, when life gives you a Karen, don't just make lemonade. Build a whole damn lemonade factory, get it tax-exempt status, and become the weirdly beloved lemonade king of the neighborhood. It's way more satisfying. And the best part? The view from the top is absolutely perfect.